Rui Antonio Shinzaki is a young man living alone in a cramped apartment in Japan. Once a talented kickboxer with a dark past tied to criminals, Antonio has left that life behind. Now he scrapes by with odd jobs like delivering and picking up goods. His minimalist lifestyle is so extreme, he doesn't even own a phone. One day, Antonio gets hired as a parking lot caretaker, replacing an old man who abruptly quit. The job is mind-numbingly dull, just watching cars park and leave. Bored out of his mind, Antonio dozes off in the booth. Suddenly, a cheerful girl shows up as if they're old friends. She enthusiastically chats away, while Antonio sits frozen, unsure how to respond. Soon, he realizes she's blind and has mistaken him for the old man who used to work there. She hands Antonio an orange, a steamed bun, and some bread she brought for him, completely unaware the old man has left. Moments later, her sharp senses notice something off. Antonio smells different. Realizing her mistake, she questions him about accepting the food. Embarrassed, Antonio awkwardly explains that the old man has moved on. The girl shares how she and the old man used to watch TV shows together in the booth. Apologizing for the confusion, she leaves with her walking stick, just as it starts to rain. Feeling awkward but concerned, Antonio invites her back inside. Grateful, she accepts and they watch her favorite TV show. Antonio observes how deeply she listens to the audio, completely immersed in the story. Before leaving, she gives him the bread as thanks and reminds him to water the tea olive plant the old man cared for. Amused by the unexpected visit, Antonio eats the bread later that night and waters the plant. Meanwhile, the girl, Akari Kashiwagi, goes about her daily routine. Living alone, she cooks her own meals and works at a call center, patiently handling even the most difficult customers. Her boss, however, is intrusive and makes her uncomfortable, but she tolerates it in silence, fearing for her job. Antonio decides to revisit the kickboxing club where he used to train. His coach, Jean, welcomes him warmly, but the club owner is less forgiving, still bitter about Antonio's criminal past. Jean encourages Antonio to rejoin the club, but Antonio clarifies he's there only to apologize, not to come back. Later, he makes a difficult call to a woman whose husband he had hurt in the past. She kindly asks him not to contact her again, saying she's already forgiven him. Back at the parking lot, Antonio spots Akari walking by and silently hopes she'll visit again. As if on cue, she shows up, asking if the old man has returned. Antonio returns her lunchbox and thanks her for the bread. She comments on the sweet fragrance of the tea olive flowers before settling in to watch TV with him again. This time, Akari notices a bad smell and asks if Antonio has been exercising. Mortified, he realizes it's coming from his old, dirty shoes. She laughs it off, explaining how her heightened senses help her perceive things differently. She asks him to describe the TV show's heroine. To amuse her, he fibs, saying the heroine wears earrings like hers. Her delight at this simple coincidence leaves Antonio quietly pleased. Before leaving, she introduces herself as Akari Kashiwagi. When Antonio shakes her hand, she notes his calloused palms. She asks if she can visit next week, and Antonio quickly agrees. At home, Akari's day takes a turn. While doing laundry, the drain clogs, flooding her washroom. She slips while trying to fix it and hurts her leg. The next day, Antonio anxiously waits for the sound of Akari's walking stick. When she finally arrives, she immediately notices the fresh smell of his new shoes. They watch TV together, and during a romantic scene, Akari playfully asks if Antonio thinks the hero is handsome. Antonio admits the hero is attractive, but also a playboy. Teasingly, Akari asks Antonio if he's handsome. When he hesitates, she laughs and declares that hearts matter more than looks. Antonio doesn't realize it yet, but her charm is already working its magic on him. Antonio doesn't know what to reply. Akari, with her signature playful charm, jokes, "If you have to think so hard about it, maybe you're not that handsome after all." She quickly adds, "But who cares about looks? It's the heart that matters." Antonio sits in silence, but inside, something is shifting. Akari's warmth is undeniable. Yes, she's got the charm. And yes, Antonio has fallen for her, though he hasn't realized it yet himself. As Akari leaves, disaster strikes. A car nearly hits her, and she stumbles, worsening her already injured leg. Alarmed, Antonio rushes her to the hospital. Her feet are bandaged, and on their way back, she struggles to walk. "What's your name?" she asks. Antonio hesitates, unsure how she'll react to his English name. Teasingly, she resorts to calling him uncle or old man whenever she stumbles, much to his embarrassment. Ignoring her warnings, Antonio lifts her effortlessly and carries her home, even as she laughs and says he'll regret it. Her home is at the top of a flight of stairs, a fact she gleefully reminds him of when they arrive. Antonio painstakingly climbs the stairs with her in his arms, a labor of love he won't admit to. Inside, Akari makes another request. Her laundry drain is clogged. Antonio sets to work, only to find the culprit, a pair of her panties. Both turn red with embarrassment. To thank him, Akari gives him a couple of concert tickets, encouraging him to take a friend. When Antonio doesn't respond, she offers to go with him, realizing he likely doesn't have friends. Concert day arrives. Akari, excited but self-conscious, changes outfits at the last minute. She looks beautiful, dressed like any other girl her age, eager for a night out. At the concert, she asks Antonio to describe the musicians, savoring every detail he shares. Antonio feels a bit out of place, but can't help enjoying her happiness. Later, they go to a grilling restaurant Akari has always wanted to visit. "This is amazing," she exclaims, completely thrilled. While flipping meat, she accidentally drops a piece on her shirt, staining it. She laughs at herself, brushing it off, and talks about her life. She shares memories of sculpting in college and visiting this very restaurant with her parents when she was younger. "I never thought those moments would become just memories," she says wistfully. When she asks Antonio about his life outside work, he stiffens. "I just do delivery jobs," he says, still pretending to be an older man. Akari jokes, "What are you, a divorcee? An adulterer?" But Antonio doesn't laugh. Sensing his discomfort, she stops, apologizing for the joke. "Why do you want to know about my past?" Antonio asks, guarded. Akari replies gently, "I just want to know you better." Antonio snaps, his words sharp and defensive. Hurt, Akari decides to leave. He drops her off, and before parting, she apologizes, saying, "Sorry for exhausting you." Finally, Antonio speaks. "My name is Antonio," he says, surprising her. He admits he's only 24 years old, not the old man she assumed. He confesses to being a trained kickboxer with a criminal past, adding that he's terrible at expressing himself. Akari responds with her usual calm grace, thanks him again, and heads inside. The next day, Akari faces an uncomfortable situation at work. Her boss calls her into his office and gives her a birthday present. She tries to refuse, reminding him he already gave her concert tickets, but he insists. The gift, a necklace, is clearly inappropriate. Worse, he ogles her, taking advantage of her blindness, and awkwardly invites her on a date. Just as she struggles to respond, a colleague interrupts, asking her to handle an important customer call. Relieved, Akari escapes the office. Meanwhile, Antonio's past comes knocking. His former kickboxing coaches visit him at the parking lot, urging him to rejoin. Antonio politely refuses. Gene, his old coach, reminisces about Antonio's raw talent, recalling how he believed Antonio could become a world champion when they first met at underground tournaments. But Antonio reveals the darker side of his story. He confesses he was imprisoned for 3 years, a sentence tied to his involvement with Sakumo, a ruthless loan shark. Antonio shares how he worked as Sakumo's enforcer, doing unspeakable things to those who crossed the organization. Hearing this, his coaches are stunned into silence. Later, Antonio visits the orphanage where he grew up. The nun who raised him greets him warmly. "Have you stopped working with the bad guys?" she asks. In response, Antonio shows her the scar on his hand where he had the criminal organization's tattoo removed. Relieved, the nun tells him to smile more and hands him a handmade hair bow crafted by the orphanage children. "Give this to someone you like," she says, smiling. Antonio can't help but remember his tough childhood, growing up under the influence of Sakuma, a fellow orphan who taught him to equate kindness with weakness. Sakuma's voice still echoes in his mind, mocking good guys as fools. But as Antonio holds the bow, he starts to feel the pull of something new, a chance at redemption, a chance to change. Meanwhile, Akari returns home from work, exhausted, only to find her boss waiting at her door. Ignoring her protests, he forces his way inside, his behavior intrusive and unnerving. As he looks around her home, he notices the unopened gift he gave her and grows irritated. Suddenly, he pushes her onto the couch and forces the necklace onto her neck. Akari struggles, scratching him as she tries to break free. Enraged, he grabs her arm, hurting her further. Desperate, she reaches for her alarm, but it's no use. He keeps hurting her. At that moment, Antonio bursts in. He doesn't waste a second, pulling the man off Akari and unleashing a flurry of punches. Akari shouts for Antonio to stop, but his rage burns too hot. He finally stops, but not before breaking the man's finger as a warning. Akari is distressed. She scolds Antonio for not stopping when she asked, fearing the consequences for her job. Antonio, on the other hand, can't believe she's even considering returning to work after such an incident. He's upset, but Akari explains how difficult it is for a blind person to find employment. Despite Antonio's insistence that he'll take care of everything, she remains determined to go back as if nothing happened. Before leaving, Antonio places the hair bow the orphanage nun gave him on her table. Both feel lonely that night, their thoughts weighed down by what happened. The next day, Akari surprises Antonio by visiting him at the parking lot. She has resigned from her job and proposes they take a trip. Relieved and happy, Antonio agrees, and they head to a beach near a wind farm. At the beach, the waves crash rhythmically against the shore. Antonio opens up, sharing how he once walked along this very beach with his mother, who tried to end both of their lives but failed. Akari listens intently, her presence as comforting as the gentle breeze. She asks Antonio to search for sea glass, and when he finds a piece, she teaches him to feel its smooth edges. Pain makes people kinder, she says, giving him the sea glass as a token of their bond. Antonio reclaims his life with newfound determination. He rejoins kickboxing, throwing himself into fierce training. He also gifts Akari a golden retriever puppy, which she names Suku. Together, they repair her home, opening the windows to let in light and warmth. One day, Akari softly asks to see Antonio's face. Gently, she feels his features with her hands, sculpting his image in her mind. "Look into my eyes," she insists, and though it overwhelms him, he finally does. In that moment, they share their first kiss. Their lives take on a rhythm of healing and growth. Antonio wins tournaments with his relentless training, while Akari dives back into her passion for sculpting and pottery. They begin living together with Suku, and Akari crafts beautiful mugs and jugs. She even learns massage techniques and practices on Antonio, discovering his tattoo removal scar. When she asks about it, he lies, saying it's a burn. "You don't need to be a masseuse for a living," Antonio tells her. "I'm going to win enough to open a pottery studio for you." Touched, Akari hugs him. But Antonio's past isn't done with him yet. After a victorious tournament, Sakuma, his ruthless childhood friend and former boss, reappears. Sakuma insults Antonio's coach, but Antonio calmly asks his coach not to intervene. "I don't want anything to do with you, Sakuma," Antonio says firmly before leaving. The next day, Akari takes Antonio to her parents' cemetery. She reveals the heartbreaking story of how her parents died. For years ago, she was celebrating getting her driver's license when she saw a man falling from a building engulfed in flames. Startled, she lost control of the car, which flipped over. Antonio's heart stops. He recognizes the date on her parents' gravestone. It matches the day he tortured a man who betrayed Sakuma. That man had set himself on fire to escape. Antonio realizes, to his horror, that he indirectly caused the accident that blinded Akari and killed her parents. Stricken with guilt, Antonio can't bring himself to confess. His torment deepens when Akari speaks of how her parents' spirits must have guided her to him. Antonio throws himself into grueling training, trying to bury his pain. One day, Akari experiences sharp pain in her eyes. Around the same time, Tsukumo approaches Antonio, pressuring him to compete in an illegal underground match for a massive prize. Antonio refuses, but returns home to find Akari missing. Panicked, he rushes to the hospital and learns she has fainted and injured her ribs. The doctor reveals she also has a retinal detachment requiring surgery to preserve what little vision she has. Antonio is shaken. He confronts Akari about hiding the need for surgery. She views her blindness as penance for her parents' deaths. But Antonio convinces her not to miss the chance to see her future children and husband. When they return home, they find the criminal organization's logo painted on Akari's door. Determined to protect her, Antonio lies to Tsukumo, claiming he and Akari have broken up. Tsukumo offers to set Antonio free if he wins one final underground match, giving him an advance. Antonio gives the money to his coach, asking him to cover Akari's surgery. Antonio burns every trace of his identity before entering the underground ring. The match is brutal, with no rules except one: win by knockout or death. Antonio struggles, but makes an incredible comeback, knocking his opponent out cold. Bleeding and battered, Antonio looks to the crowd. Among them, he sees his coach cheering him on. Antonio's fight isn't just for survival, it's for redemption. Akari's surgery is a success, and she regains her vision. The moment she opens her eyes, tears stream down her face as she sees the world anew. Her joy is bittersweet, however, as Antonio is nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, Antonio learns from his coach that his prize money has been split. Part went toward Akari's surgery, and the rest was given to the widow of the man he had tortured long ago. The news that Akari can now see fills him with relief. For the first time in years, he feels unburdened by his past. But freedom comes at a price. As Antonio walks through the streets, Sakuma confronts him, hitting him with a car and stabbing him. This is what happens to traitors. Sakuma sneers, leaving Antonio bleeding on the ground. Back at her apartment, Akari realizes Antonio is gone. To make matters worse, her building is being demolished for reconstruction, forcing her to move. One day, she receives a courier. Inside is a music box playing their favorite song, the one they used to hum together. She notices it's been sent from the orphanage. Akari visits the orphanage, desperate for answers. The nun recognizes her and tells her everything: how Antonio blamed himself for her parents' deaths and disappeared. Akari collapses in tears, her heart breaking for the man she loves. In her new home, Akari sculpts Antonio's likeness from memory. Over time, she channels her pain into her work, opening a pottery studio and shop. Tsuko, now fully grown, is her loyal companion. She also volunteers as a masseuse at a rehabilitation center, offering comfort to patients. One day, she meets a young paralyzed man at the center. It's Antonio. Though he immediately recognizes her, he hides his identity, introducing himself with a fake name. As she massages him, Akari senses something familiar about him, but brushes it off. Antonio, however, is overwhelmed, holding back tears as she leaves. A few days later, Antonio ventures out with crutches. He stumbles upon a shop named Antonio and, curious, walks in. Inside, he sees a tea olive plant and buys it, drawn by its sweet fragrance. As he browses, he spots the same music box he had sent Akari. He plays it, and the familiar melody brings back a flood of memories, causing him to sob. Clutching the plant, he leaves the shop. Fate intervenes again. Tsuko spots Antonio and bounds toward him, knocking him down. Akari rushes to help, recognizing him as the man from the rehabilitation center. She offers to drive him home, but Antonio refuses, keeping his distance. When Akari returns to her shop, her salesgirl tells her about a customer who cried while listening to the music box. Realization dawns on Akari. The man with the crutches was Antonio. Desperate, Akari searches the streets for him, but finds no trace. Antonio, meanwhile, walks to the beach near the wind farm. Holding the piece of sea glass Akari gave him, he wades into the water, lost in thought. Just as he's about to let the waves take him, someone calls his name. He turns to see Akari standing there, tears in her eyes. "Come home," she says softly. Antonio breaks down. She takes his face in her hands, gazing deeply into his eyes. "You're my home," she whispers, and Antonio finally admits, "You're my home too." They hug, both crying, their love rekindled. Antonio has found redemption, and together, they embrace a future filled with hope, healing, and a love that transcends even the darkest past. Did you enjoy the recap? Please like and subscribe, and hit the notification bell to be updated next time we drop. Thanks for watching.